good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where it is in the world you are joining us from. We always have questions submitted from all over the world, but greatly appreciate you tuning in at whatever time it is for you into another one of our weekly webinar series. I am your host for today. My name is Sarah Harrington. I am the nutritionist here at Brio Medical Center in sunny today. Last time I did one of these, it was raining, Scottsdale, Arizona. And today we are going to be talking about and diving quite deep into all things ketogenic diets. And it's actually coincidentally really awesome that we're recording this webinar today, because our brilliant medical director, Dr. Goodyear, is currently interviewing one of the pioneers in this research area, Dr. Thomas Seyfried. So if you are interested in learning more about these topics, look out for those podcasts to drop in the next few weeks. We are really building a awesome arsenal of knowledge for you to pull from now and in the future. But to give you just a scope of how today is going to go for our little chat and Q&A, like I said, we're going to be diving into all things keto. So we're going to talk about the science a little bit. We're going to talk about strategies. We're going to talk about differences in types of and approaches to ketogenic diets. We are going to, at the end, actually give you something tangible that you can take away from this as well, something that you can implement right away, which are some really awesome, really delicious recipes. And if you happen to try them, if you make them at home, share them on social media, tag us, let us know how they went, let us know if you liked them. I don't know about you guys, but I think that tastes good. So I hope you like those. Please, in the chat, feel free to drop your questions at any time. After we go through a little bit of information, we will get to those, and I will try to answer as many as I can. So let's get into it, shall we? All right. So this doesn't necessarily just apply to ketogenic diets, but diet in general when it comes to cancer treatment, cancer prevention. What role can diet play in these? Can be modulating. It can do a myriad of things. What you eat, for good or for bad, can force cancer cell metabolism to change. It can place metabolic stress on tumor cells. It can starve the body of potentially harmful or toxic nutrients. It can also help or hurt the health of your microbiome, which modulates so many systems in your body, from your immune system to your mental health. It can reduce the rate of tumor cell growth. It can improve your quality of life during treatment. It can improve the efficacy of certain treatments, improve overall metabolic health. You could argue that diet alone itself is an immunotherapy. Now, what is, just to make it clear and to make sure we're all on the same page, what is a ketogenic diet? A ketogenic diet is more than just not eating carbs. And it's more than eating a lot of protein or eating a lot of dairy, or actually, like the story that I heard today, using heavy cream in your pink drink at Starbucks instead of whatever it is that they put in a pink drink at Starbucks instead. It's more nuanced than that, especially if we're talking about therapeutic ketosis, especially when it comes to cancer treatment. It's a little bit more specific. But in abstract, a ketogenic diet favors fat in the diet as the main macronutrient. Now, normally in a standard Western American diet, we eat a lot of carbohydrates. We eat a lot of carbohydrates because our bodies, all of the cells in our bodies, use carbohydrates, use glucose to produce energy. Now, it's not necessarily a secret at this point, or something that a lot of people have not heard, that of this idea that cancer loves sugar. Well, tumor cells, and this is the idea, this is the theory of the Warburg effect. Tumor cells, just like every cell in our body, rely on glucose, rely on sugar for energy. However, tumor cells are damaged, okay? They have a higher reliance on glycolysis, the breakdown of carbohydrates into energy. They can also use glutamine. They also ferment glutamine, but there's a very high reliance on carbohydrates for energy. And because they have damaged cellular metabolism, they have a tendency to allocate a lot of this energy that they, are able to produce towards replication, which is why tumor cells are often able to replicate so quickly. Now, the therapeutic side of eating more fat with cancer, okay? So what a ketogenic diet does is it shifts the entire body from relying on the breakdown of carbohydrates, of sugar into energy, to relying on the breakdown of fatty acids. So during what we call lipolysis, the body breaks down fats into free fatty acids. Basically, this happens when there isn't enough sugar, there isn't enough glucose available in the body for the body to use it. So it starts to break down fats, whether that's dietary fat, whether that's stored fat. And most of this happens in the liver, but it's the body, cells in the body start to use fatty acids and ketones for energy, okay? The caveat to this, the reason why this can be therapeutic when it comes to cancer is because of the heavy reliance of tumor cells on the breakdown of carbohydrates. The other cells in your body can use ketones, can use the breakdown of fatty acids for energy production, and they can do so really, really efficiently. So it can keep all the other cells in your body pretty darn healthy. But almost all tumor cells, they can't use ketones for energy. They can't use them. Maybe a few of them potentially can if there is some oxidative potential left, but they can't use these ketone bodies for energy. So theoretically, what we're doing is we're starving them. We're starving them of one of their preferred sources of energies when we are on a ketogenic diet. Beyond that, has some additional benefits as well. Ketogenic diets have an inherent muscle preserving effect, so they can help to preserve skeletal muscle mass, which is useful in cases of cachexia or muscle wasting. Actually, ketogenic diets, we see better meal compliance, which could partially be due to the fact that fat is denser in calories, so meals tend to be smaller and more frequent, also contributing to increased and better overall energy intake. Ketogenic diets, we also see reduced expression of inflammatory cytokines. It activates AMPK by the exchange of glucose by ketone bodies in tumor cells, and AMPK is associated with the suppression of cell proliferation, overcoming inflammation, cell growth inhibition, cell cycle arrest. It's also associated with certain tumor suppressing genes. Along that same line, ketogenic diet can potentially alter microRNA expression, which potentially can impact progression, and act as an epigenetic modifier in that way. Can also be anti-angiogenic, configuring the microenvironment surrounding a tumor, potentially allowing it to become more vulnerable to other treatments. So a wide variety of things that it can potentially do beyond just starving tumor cells. So, yes, there is quite a lot of, and still emerging. There's so much research continuing to come out in this arena, but there is quite a lot that has been done already. Now, this graph on the left is actually, number one, I love visuals. I think they're very handy, especially when we're, painting a picture and trying to look at things. But this is, believe it or not, the first visual that I was ever presented with when it came to ketogenic diets and cancer. And I wanted to put it in because I think it's also useful in showing differences in research across different tumor types. Basically, this is pulled from a research review that came out in 2018, looking at the potential anti-tumor effects of ketogenic diets in different tumor types. And if you can see the itty-bitty writing that's on here, anything with a T is going to be a ketogenic diet that was combined with time-restricted feeding, and anything with an R is going to be calorie restriction combined with a ketogenic diet. Now, there's a couple things that are red on here. One thing that is orange, so we're going to talk about that in a second. So those are going to be the things that were, there was a side effect or a pro-tumor effect. So we'll kind of talk about those here in a moment. But since this came out in 2018, there's been a myriad of additional research, and there was a lot in 2022. 2022 was a good year for ketogenic diet research, apparently. But there was additional positive results with ketogenic diet slowing growth of prostate cancer, additional positive results for beta-hydroxybutyrate suppression in colorectal cancer, Thomas Seyfried, again, good results with breast cancer in ketogenic diets, saw better outcomes when combined or after chemo and radiation in lung cancer patients with metastasis to the brain. So yeah, there's quite a lot of research that so far is showing a ketogenic diet has a lot of potential in the fight against cancer. The pro-tumor results, two of them. Now, this is definitely an area where we will continue to dive into and to keep up on the research and continue to learn more. There were two mice models of renal cell carcinomas that showed either a pro-tumor effect or a severe side effect. I will note in both of those studies, there was a comorbidity. There was a comorbidity of some sort of kidney disease. This year, excuse me, there was a little bit more, or there was a more recent study about clear cell renal carcinoma's response to beta-hydroxybutyrate under glucose-deprived conditions, and that showed some really positive results. So what we can take from that is there's never a best one-size-fits-all. Comorbidities, individual cases, genetics, all of these things are absolutely going to play a role. But there are definitely some more things to look into in certain types of tumors when it comes to a ketogenic diet. The other one was melanoma that was BRAF positive. And there is some indication that perhaps this genetic mutation leads to upregulated lipid metabolism, in which case potentially something like a plant-based Mediterranean diet might be a little bit better of approach in these cases. But again, another area where we just need more research and able to confirm this. But yeah, so that's a little bit on the sciencey part. Now we'll get to the part that probably everybody really wants to know, which is more of the utilization side of it. So there are levels to a ketogenic diet. And there are differences in types of ketogenic diets. So we'll talk about the levels first of kind of the therapeutic versus nutritional versus not being in ketosis at all. So we can measure how deep you are in ketosis, which can basically say how effective the diet is in your body for potentially having good outcomes for influencing treatment, etc., by measuring the GKI. Now, the GKI is the glucose ketone index. And we use this because even if somebody's ketones are good, if their blood glucose is not, then we're not necessarily getting as much benefit out of the diet as we can. So we don't just look at, or we don't want to just look at glucose, we don't want to just look at ketones, we want to look at the two together. So the GKI was created for that. So if ketones are generally below 0.5 mmol, based on, say, like a capillary finger stick, then the individual is not in ketosis, GKI above 9. Nutritional ketosis. Okay, nutritional ketosis, we're still getting benefits of being in ketosis. This is where a lot of people fall if they're kind of casually following a ketogenic diet, this is honestly where the majority of people fall, not just if you're casually following a ketogenic diet, just because getting higher than this range honestly can be difficult for a lot of people, which is what we call nutritional ketosis, which is where ketones are between 0.5 and 2.9, and your GKI is somewhere between like 3 and 8.9. Then we have the therapeutic range, and the therapeutic ketosis range is really what we look for in a lot of cases. Not every case, but a lot of cases, and can be difficult for a lot of people to achieve. For other people, it's really easy. For some people, it's really hard. It just depends. It depends on a lot of physiological factors. GKI below 3, ketones between usually 3 and 7. We don't necessarily want them to be higher than that. Okay? Now, there are a lot of iterations of the ketogenic diet, kind of like I said before, ordering a pink drink with heavy cream. We have our mainstream keto diet. So our mainstream keto diet is the one that you've probably heard about in the media, on social media, on TV, on the news, in a book, which is you eat a lot of protein. You eat a lot of protein, you eat a lot of red meat, you eat a lot of dairy, you eat a lot of things that are potentially high in omega-6s. That's kind of the mainstream, what I consider to be dirty keto. Now, then we have plant-based keto. And somebody submitted a question about this, which we'll circle back to, but we have plant-based keto. So plant-based keto diet is where the sources of fat in the diet are coming from things like nuts and seeds and avocados and some high fiber legumes that could potentially, fit into the diet, soy, leafy greens, olive oil, coconut, MCT oil, those types of things, okay? That is for all intents and purposes, more balanced, more therapeutic version of a ketogenic diet for a lot of people. It's anti-inflammatory, can help the gut microbiome, as can more of a Mediterranean ketogenic diet, which includes more things like fatty fish, a few more sources of animal proteins, but continues to focus on things like olive oil, nuts, leafy greens, high fibrous vegetables, etc. So those are kind of the different camps, one could say, that the ketogenic diet kind of falls into. Now, that's not all-encompassing. There are ways to meld those together in a way that works for you or works for the individual and their preferences. But those are kind of the three main categories that can be deduced from this type of eating. Also, like I said, a ketogenic diet, it's more than just reducing carbs and eating more protein. Actually, a ketogenic diet generally has to be like low to moderate in protein in order for individuals to kind of get into that higher nutritional ketosis or therapeutic ketosis range. So the macronutrient requirements, usually what it looks like for therapeutic ketosis, usually the ratios look like a 3-to-1 ratio of fats to carbs and proteins, or even a 4-to-1 ratio of fats to carbs and proteins. Realistically, that looks like at least 70% of total caloric intake coming from fat, like 20% from protein, and then 10% or less from carbohydrates. Abstractly, that sounds kind of wild. Those ratios kind of sound pretty wild, but when you put it into an actual meal structure, it's really not that crazy. So that ratio, the 70-20-10, that would look like 3 ounces of wild-caught salmon, half of a decent sized avocado, 2 cups of spinach, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So that's a pretty normal meal. That's not crazy. Just the ratios, when you say them like that, they sound a little out there, a little outlandish. But you could be eating all of the right things. You could be eating spinach and wild-caught salmon and olive oil and avocado exclusively in those ratios. But how do we know if it's working? How do we know if somebody is in ketosis? How do we keep tabs on that? Well, we can check. We can keep tabs on that. Like I said, we use the GKI. We use things like capillary blood glucose, capillary ketones in order to see what's going on. And this is something that you can do at home. You can get something called a Keto Mojo. Now, a Keto Mojo is super handy, and it functions exactly like a blood glucose monitor, one of those little handheld blood glucose monitors. And what it does, it will tell you your blood glucose, and it will tell you your ketones anytime you prick your finger. It links to an app that you can download on your phone, and then it will calculate your GKI and save that information for you so you can keep an eye on that over time. Now, that's super handy. That is super handy, especially when you're trying to get into ketosis. It's also handy when you're really tailoring your diet, when you're trying to figure out what foods exactly work for you. For example, there are some people, it takes getting into ketosis and staying in ketosis look really different for different people. Like I said, there's some people who stay into ketosis and high levels of ketosis really easily, and there's some people who it's a little bit more difficult for. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but you can use the Keto Mojo surrounding the times that you eat, and use it to assess kind of the ratios and the types of food and even the types of vegetables, oils, fats that really help to keep you in ketosis, get you into ketosis, etc. So that's kind of a dire tool, is some sort of ketone monitor. They also make urine strips that can test your ketones. They also make like breath analyzers, but the blood ketone monitors are really the most accurate. Lab monitoring that can be evaluated by your integrative care team also is going to be important if you are following a ketogenic diet long term. Make sure electrolytes in balance, make sure your glucose is in balance, lipids are okay, vitamin D, and also keeping a food journal, at least at the beginning. Now, I am not, and I will never be a fan of a lot of people using food journals all the time. However, because I think it's cumbersome. It's really quite cumbersome to have to just write down what you're eating all of the time. It's just one more thing to add to the list when you've 1,000 other things to do and to think about. However, it can be a really useful tool when you're beginning to calculate your macronutrient ratios, because there more than likely is less fat, and I'm just speaking from experience, there's more than likely less fat and more carbohydrates and potentially more proteins in the things that you're eating than you're realizing. So especially if you're struggling to get into ketosis, really kind of getting a snapshot picture of what you're eating in terms of your macronutrients can be useful. Also looking at your micronutrients, so your vitamins, your minerals, your omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, those are also going to be really important and best done, of course, under the supervision of an integrative care team or a nutritionist. Okay. Lots of good things. Lots of potential good things about a ketogenic diet. What are the downsides? There are downsides. There's downsides to everything. Number one, the most obvious one, is food preference. You might not like chicken thighs instead of a chicken breast. You might not like avocado. You might not like things like MCT oil. These things also might not be the most readily available. They also might not be the easiest to prepare. Ketogenic diets in combination with intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, these are really therapeutic. From the research that we have, it suggests that these are really therapeutic approaches, but they can be difficult for adherence because they are limiting. Palatability is another problem that can come up with a ketogenic diet. For example, if you are experiencing nausea, foods that are particularly fatty may not sound appealing to you. They may not sound appealing to you. They might, they might be triggering in that regard. In which case, these are all workaroundable. These are all things that are workaroundable, but it's good to know that these are potential problems so you can plan for them in advance, I should say. And then there are, of course, comorbidities, reasons that an individual should not follow a ketogenic diet. When you're thinking about following any type of dietary pattern, and this is for individuals who have cancer, this is for individuals who may be trying to prevent cancer, or if you're listening on behalf of a loved one, any dietary change, especially one that could potentially be of this magnitude, should be done and consulted with an integrative care team under the supervision of a MD, of an ND with ideally a nutritionist on staff as well. But comorbidities are something to take into account. So if there's, any fat metabolism disorders, hypoglycemia, gallbladder diseases, anything that might influence the breakdown of fat, even if there is gut dysbiosis that is influencing negatively the breakdown of fat. All of these things can make this a ideal choice for that individual. Lipids, cholesterol, all of these things can potentially play a role, which is why an integrative strategy, such as the one that we take at Brio, is so dire in kind of designing these kinds of treatment plans. Okay, getting into ketosis in the first place. There are strategies that you can have in your arsenal that can help kind of speed the process along or be part of your arsenal to keep you in ketosis. Because like I said, it's different for different individuals. One of those is fasting. Fasting, so let's theoretically say someone trying to get into ketosis in the first place, okay? Body is adapted to currently using carbohydrates. Fasting, if we're not eating, eventually the body starts to run out of these stores of carbohydrates. When we run out of stores of carbohydrates, what does the body do? Starts to break down fatty acids, starts to produce ketones. So fasting, that's one tool in, the pocket that can be used to help to either induce ketosis or stay in ketosis. Second one is exercise. Now, it doesn't have to be, have to run a marathon to use up all of your glycogen stores, because that'll do it. But exercise will use up stores of glycogen, stores of carbohydrates and sugars that you have in your body. And when you run out of those, guess what? Your body's going to start to produce ketones. Dietary-wise, obviously, other than the correct ratios of macronutrients, there's also specific nutrients, or specific foods that can help to boost ketone levels. One of those is MCT oil, which is a medium chain triglyceride oil. Now, MCT oil it's a different fat than a short chain or long chain fatty acid. It converts really well, really efficiently into ketones. So if you've heard of bulletproof coffee is often made with butter, but bulletproof coffee, tablespoon of MCT oil, it's not just a fad necessarily that, CEOs came up with to give themselves more energy in the morning. It actually can have some therapeutic benefit in terms of boosting ketone levels. So MCT oil is another thing in the arsenal. Then we have exogenous ketones. Now these are a little bit different. Okay, so so exogenous ketones are basically, so your body creates ketone bodies, but you can also supplement with those. So they come in two main forms, which are ketone esters and ketone salts. And basically by ingesting these, you're temporarily increasing your ketone level in the body. It doesn't seem that these necessarily immediately allow your body to produce more ketones, but they can potentially be used to augment or boost ketone levels during intensive therapies or to kickstart the process. Ketone salts are kind of the baby level, not necessarily baby level, but they're the lower tier in terms of potency. They tend to work for most people. Ketone esters are the next level of these supplements. but they don't taste very good. They're very effective, but they don't taste very good. Okay, circling back to reasons why someone might be experiencing difficulty getting into ketosis. Now, the most common one that I see is that there's just simply an incorrect ratio of macronutrients. Someone is miscalculating how much fat they're eating, how much carbs they're eating, there's sugar sneaking in somewhere, perhaps they're actually eating too many vegetables at once or too much protein. That is the most common reason that I see. It's dietary, which is why using tools like Chronometer are so useful. But that's the most common. It's not the only factor. Genetics can also be one. You can have SNPs, you can have genes that make it so your body does not metabolize fatty acids as efficiently. So that can make it a little bit more difficult for your body to kick into ketosis. In those cases, perhaps something like exogenous ketones are a little bit more appropriate if there is a genetic barrier and we're trying to achieve higher ranges. And then finally, age. Unfortunately, as we age, there's a slower conversion of glycogen into glucose. So plus we tend to get a little bit more sedentary, not in every case, but in general. So there's just a decreased rate of glycogen depletion in the body. We run out of carbohydrates slower. So it takes longer for our body to start to use fats because it doesn't need to yet. So those are three main reasons why someone might be struggling. And then finally, I just want to, before we get to the question part, I want to talk briefly about a ketogenic diet when it comes to prevention. Now, this is not just true of cancer. This is really true of just disease progression in general when we look at evidence linked to diet. A lot of the evidence that we have, it comes from observational research, which makes it a little bit less reliable. However, we can use it to track trends and then kind of look a little bit closer at the science and then use that to draw some conclusions. We do know that there are numerous types of cancer that are linked with overweight and obesity, and the intake of high-calorie, sugar-laden foods. We know that. A ketogenic diet it can be high in calorie, but it can be metabolically advantageous. The dietary changes associated with a ketogenic diet, it targets multiple pathways, including insulin, mTOR, obviously ketone bodies, IGF, all that may influence metabolic disease. Circling back to what we said before, activation of AMPK pathways, which not only have a potential anti-tumor effect, but also reduce inflammation and can alter gene expression. Beta-hydroxybutyrate can protect mitochondria from oxidative damage. So it is a possible tool in the arsenal. There are physiological benefits that come from a ketogenic diet when it comes to creating an environment in the body that is not conducive to the growth of cancer. It is not, however, the only diet that necessarily does so. Mediterranean diets. There's some research for Paleolithic diets. But the common theme surrounding all of those is what they focus on is high fiber foods, monounsaturated fats, lean proteins, whole natural foods when it comes to prevention, a little bit more so than necessarily exclusively eating 70% fat. But I do want to say honorable mention. There are some very good microbiome benefits from following a ketogenic diet. Fiber, polyunsaturated fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, all of these can help to create a very positive microbiome environment, which can further influence positive health outcomes. And I just wanted to put these here just for some additional reading material for those who are interested. The Metabolic Approach to Cancer by Dr. Naisha Winters, How to Starve Cancer by Jane McClelland. These are great books for anybody who is interested in also diving a little bit deeper into this. So, thanks for letting me spiel for a while. I do hope that that kind of overview, and I'm pulling up the questions now, and we will get to answering those, shall we? Okay. So, I apologize for the audio glitch with Zoom a little bit earlier. But we will have this recorded on YouTube, so if there was any bit that you missed, you can check it out on there. Now, I really wanted to start with this one, which was submitted ahead of time, but I just love this. This is from Jennifer from Arizona. We'll get to Sam's question. Okay, Jennifer from Arizona. I recently beat cancer and did the keto diet, but as I read and research, I'm leaning towards plant-based only, no meat or animal products. Your thoughts? Well, Jennifer from Arizona, you are a warrior, and I am so thrilled for you and happy for your journey. There's a couple of different ways that you can look at this, and I don't know your case, so I'm not going to necessarily say this is, necessarily advice for you. This is more an abstract. If someone gets a clean PET scan, or their doctor tells them there's no evidence of disease, I would say it would not be the wisest choice to immediately pivot to something else. For all intents and purposes, don't fix what isn't broken, at least for a short period of time. After which, when it comes to adapting to our life, that's the most important thing, is adapting to our life. And sustainability. That's also a big thing when it comes to choosing a dietary pattern. Now, keto has a purpose. If you're using keto as part of a integrative cancer treatment strategy, that has a purpose. When we're coming out of that, then we have to adapt our diet to not only supporting our health, but also supporting our life. There is some indication that cancer survivors may be more at risk for cardiovascular disease, in which case sourcing of fat, if one was to continue a ketogenic diet, would be important, monitoring of lipids, cholesterol, etc. But a more plant-based approach can be very beneficial. Lots of fiber, lots of healthy healthy fatty acids, perhaps the occasional lean protein. But the important thing is that it works for you and your lifestyle. And keto is something that you can have in your back pocket. Kind of like we said before, there are still some benefits to that. So potentially integrating more carbohydrates in the evening, getting some of the benefits during the day of having ketone bodies present. There are different adaptations that can be taken. All right. Okay. This is a good question. How might, and this just came in, so I apologize, I don't know actually who sent this one, but how might a ketogenic diet impact my energy levels, mood, or overall well-being during the transition into the new routine? That's a very good question. There are levels to that. If I'm looking down, it's because I'm referencing back to this question. So let's start with the first one. Let's start with energy levels. A ketogenic diet, bear with me. A ketogenic diet is really popular for weight loss. Why? Well, a ketogenic diet is a really popular diet for weight loss. Number one, because fat is satiating. Okay, fat makes us feel more full when we eat it than either of the other nutrients. So for weight loss, we eat less of it and we feel like we're more full. But one of the reasons it works so well for weight loss is that we can create more energy from fat than we can from carbohydrates. So when we're efficiently burning fat for energy, when our ketones are high, we feel like we have a lot of energy. We feel really good running on ketones. So once we get to that point, we feel really good. There's this idea of I'm sure you've heard of the keto flu, which is that there's this intermediary period where your body is kind of trying to figure it out, and you get these, flu-like symptoms from following a ketogenic diet. I see this in kind of two. I very rarely see this. Most people transition without any issue, but when I do see it, realistically, there's probably some detox happening. Somebody is coming off of a traditional Western processed or a high processed food diet, and the body is detoxing from that, which that detox process can lead to flu-like symptoms. Number two, there's a little bit of a wish-wash in terms of what the body is using for energy. So maybe the body hasn't really turned over to efficiently using ketones. So there's a little bit of I don't want to say dichotomy, but body is kind of going back and forth between using ketones and using glucose. That process hasn't become efficient for it. And so energy levels can kind of wane, kind of go up and down. So those are kind of two things, but you can combat those by drinking a lot of water and helping yourself hydrate and helping yourself detox, and doing other integrative therapies that help your body detox during that period to help speed that process along, and then go into that dietary transition with a really solid plan, so the odds of that wishy-washy period being a little bit less. Mood-wise, it really shouldn't affect your mood more than, eating normal, your normal diet necessarily would, unless you're really unhappy about what you're eating. In which case, that's kind of a separate issue. You really don't enjoy the ketogenic diet food, but that's not really the food itself, in which case you have to work with your treatment team and your nutritionist to find foods that you enjoy eating. So I hope that kind of answers that question. That was a fun one. I liked that. Joan asked, my mom's name is Joan. It's a good name. It's not my mom. My mom did not ask that question. It came from somewhere else. I forgot the location. But should I measure my ketones and blood sugar daily? What is the ketone goal? Should you measure your ketones and blood sugar daily? I would say when you're when you're starting a ketogenic diet, you want to check your ketones and your blood sugar often. You can do that every day. You can do that every other day. Once you're in a maintenance phase of your ketogenic diet, you can do it a little bit less often, maybe, 3-4 times a week. Fasting blood glucose is a good metric to keep an eye on just in general. Interestingly enough, individuals who are adapted to a keto or on a ketogenic for a long time, research does see a slight increase in fasting glucose numbers, which isn't necessarily something to be alarmed about. It's just more than likely the hormone adaptations to there being a lack of glucose, so the liver releasing a little bit more stores in the morning. As for ketone goal, that depends. Circling back to kind of the range of nutritional versus therapeutic ketosis, it really depends on your treatment protocol and what it takes for you individually to reach those ranges, right? For some people, in order to get into the therapeutic ketosis range, they have to be eating more than 90% fat, in which case maybe they pulse that a little bit. There's sometimes, or during some periods of treatment, maybe more intensive treatments, they're a little bit more strict in trying to get their ketones a little bit higher. And then when they're not going through those treatments, maybe they lax a bit and they're a little bit more in the nutritional ketosis range. So you can kind of, so that comes down to a little bit more individual. But the GKI is also a good, very useful indicator. For therapeutic, under 3 doctor supervision, you can achieve under 1, and then nutritionally like under 9. So, okay, let's see on my phone. Okay. Can a ketogenic diet interact with my current cancer treatments or medications? There are potentially some medications that may contribute to an increased risk of lactic or metabolic ketoacidosis and lactic acid buildup in the blood. Certain anti-seizure medications can do this. There's a few that can. So potentially yes, which is why an integrative care team on your side when you're integrating a dietary protocol such as this is so important, because an integrative care team can look at everything you're doing, can look at your medications, can look at your treatment plan, can look at the dietary strategy that's going to fit into all of those pieces and put something together that is going to be the most safe and the most effective for you. Okay, I'll go back to this one. Go back to Psalm from Virginia, because I don't want to skip over yours after I accidentally did a little bit earlier. Psalm from Virginia. Hi. Is ketosis on whole food, plant-based vegan diet possible? How to maintain glucose ketone ratio of 2 or less for cancer healing. Okay, we'll start with the first part. Is ketosis on a whole food, plant-based vegan diet possible? Yes. Absolutely it is. You're going to be eating a lot of things like nuts and avocado and MCT oil, avocado oil even. Is it possible? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. Is it restrictive? Yes. Should it be done with professional guidance? Absolutely. Because if you're limiting your sources of your food sources to realistically such a small pool, what we don't want is to miss out on really important micronutrients in the diet. So it is possible, absolutely. It is limiting, admittedly. We'll be honest with that. But is it possible? Absolutely. Is it healthy? Can it be advantageous in a cancer-fighting diet or a cancer-fighting treatment protocol? Absolutely. And second part, how to maintain glucose ketone ratio of 2 or less for cancer healing. Again, depends on the individual. For some people, that's going to be really easy. For some people, it's going to be really easy. They just, and I've seen this in a lot of people. There's a lot of people who it really is. It's just easy for them to maintain a state of ketosis and get there. And there's some people where it's really difficult. So it might take increasing your intake of fat to over 90%, doing a 4-to-1 ratio of fat to everything else, or it might not. But the first step is to get a ketone monitor to look at your macronutrient ratios, to start experimenting with certain foods, and figuring out, where you're sitting now and what it takes in terms of fasting, exercise, food choices, MCT oil, what it takes to get you there. Hope that helps. Okay. This is also a really good one. These are really good questions, guys. This is fun. Okay. How do we ensure optimal intake of phytochemicals and micronutrients critical for redox balance and DNA repair mechanisms within the constraints of a ketogenic diet? And the answer to that is meticulously. Tools like Chronometer and working, again, I sound like a broken record, with an integrative care team. Somebody who can keep an eye on your intake of micronutrients and phytonutrients and help you design an eating strategy that does meet your nutrient needs. And then there's also monitoring your lab work. To see if, any potential indicators for nutritional deficiencies are popping up, who can help you, manage the health of your microbiome, which is responsible for assimilating the nutrients that you're eating. So having help doing it from a professional medical health team who is knowledgeable and well-researched in this area. And all right. How do I properly start a ketogenic diet? What are the key nutritional components? Well, macronutrient-wise, obviously you're going to focus on fat, but how you start a ketogenic diet depends on where you're coming from. If you're starting a ketogenic diet and you're eating, the standard, for all intents and purposes, the standard Western American diet, you might have to make smaller steps. It might look like for you, instead of having pancakes in the morning, you have, 2 eggs, and you do that for a few days. You start by doing one meal at a time and gather an arsenal of options for each of those meals that you enjoy. So once you're, full sail into this type of eating, you're not, scrambling for options. Versus someone who is coming off a background of eating more whole foods, eating more types of lean protein or sources of fat or vegetables, things like that, in which case this type of making the transition to a ketogenic diet looks a little bit more like removing one or two foods from the meals they're already eating and adding a little bit more of other things. So adding in a little bit more fat or an avocado in place of a sweet potato or something like that. So how you start a ketogenic diet depends on where you are now. Depending on what works for you mentally as well. So and having an honest conversation with yourself. Having an honest conversation with yourself and saying, is it better for me to go full sail into this tomorrow? Am I going to be successful in that 3 weeks from now? Does that work for me mentally, or is it wiser for me to make these small changes over the course of, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, in order to get where I want to be? And that's something that you can also discuss with professionals who can kind of help you, guide you through those steps after evaluating your own, what you're eating now and ways that you can transition a lot of those foods. We are out of time, which that's kind of, I very much enjoy talking about this topic. As a thank you for joining this webinar, I don't remember if I said this at the beginning. Oh, I did. I did say this at the beginning. We're dropping in the recipes for you. So again, let us know if you like them. Let us know if you try them. Tag us on social media. Tag us TikTok, Instagram. Share your photos. I'm really excited to hear if you like those. There's recipes for chocolate chips and donuts in there, and they're good. They are very good. And don't forget to look out for the Dr. Goodyear and Dr. Thomas Seyfried's podcast dropping in the next few weeks. I think they're doing a few of them. If you want to hear more about the research and scientific side of ketogenic diets when it comes to cancer. And it has been an honor and a privilege to speak with you all today. If you have questions regarding becoming a patient at Brio Medical Center, you can reach out to our patient care coordinators. If you're interested in getting help in integrating a ketogenic diet as a part of a holistic and integrative cancer treatment strategy. Thank you again for joining me, and it has truly been an honor. Have a wonderful rest of your evening or day, depending on where you are, and I will see you again soon.